What's up, plant lovers? I'm Devin Wallin, and my family and I, we've been in the horticulture trade for about 60 years now, and while being in this trade, one of the types of plants that has really impacted me more than any other kind of plant would be ground covers. I love ground covers because they truly are like a living mulch. We use bark mulches, pine mulches, leaf molds to cover the surface of our soils, to reduce the weeds, help retain moisture in the soil, slow erosion, have that nice finished look. Well, if I told you you could replace those mulches with ground covers that just get better every year rather than having to be replaced every year like the mulches do, wouldn't you want to be planting more and more of those? Well, I just finished designing a landscape and installing it for a client here in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Zone 6B. And a few of the clients expressed needs were she really wanted a low maintenance garden. She's sick of pulling all the weeds. And when I went and visited her garden for the first time, the thing that really struck me was it's a lot of mulch with not a lot of plant material. So first and foremost, we need to get a lot of ground covers planted in these garden beds that are going to grow and fill out. And over time, what they'll do is they're going to help to suppress those weeds. They're also going to minimize the need for those mulches every year. Once they really start to grow nice and thickly, they're going to help to keep the soil cooler in the summertime, but also warmer in the wintertime. And they're also just going to give a nice finished look to those garden beds by really filling out, they kind of thread the garden together and have a nice and create a nice harmony in the garden. So after doing that installation, I thought this would be a great opportunity to make a video of 20 of my favorite low-growing perennial ground covers. Typically, these are going to be ground covers that are great for zones like 5 to 8. If you live in areas that are colder than that, zones 4 and 3, your options are a little bit more limited. But if you live in zones 9, 10, 11, 12, you have a lot of tropical ground covers that I don't have as much experience with as I do in my zone 6B garden here in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So without further ado, let's go through the list, and I'm going to share with you guys all of these plants that I've used in designs that I've created, or I'm using them in my garden here at my home. So it's all plants that I have a lot of familiarity with and absolutely love and adore. So the very first one on the list is one of my absolute favorite genus of plants. That would be the Epimedium. These plants, they're low growers. They kind of look like they float on the surface of the soil. And what I love about them is they're great in a sunny garden, but they're also great in a part shady garden. A couple of the kinds that I've used and really love are Epimedium rubrum as well as Epimedium pink elf. And there's lots of different hybrids out there, many of which will turn beautiful colors in the autumn time. They have flowers in the spring that are nice and dainty. And best of all, they are evergreen. Second best of all is that they are very deer resistant. Now next on the list would be Dianthus. There's tons of different kinds of Dianthus, so when you're doing your research on Dianthus, you really want to go for the kinds that produce a really thick, matted foliage. Typically those kinds will have more of a silvery green kind of foliage, and as these grow and mature, they spread really well. They're very easy to divide and to, as they grow out of a space, you can easily divide them and plant them in other areas to create a nice thick ground coverage. A couple of the varieties that I have growing in my garden would be Dianthus vivid and Dianthus falling in love rosy. Both of those stay evergreen year round, and they each have really gorgeous flowers in the actually I guess it would be mid-springtime, and they're really lovely. They have really lovely cinnamony fragrance. Now, an all-time classic would be the Sempervivum Hens and Chicks. These are succulent plants. They're drought tolerant, they're sun-loving, they're great in rock gardens, poor soil areas. Now, these are not going to spread nearly as much as things like the Epimedium or the Dianthus or others on this list, but they do cover that ground really nice and thickly. And when you have little clumps of Sempervivum growing, their geometry, their beauty is unparalleled. Particularly, I love the fact that they are actually they change their color tones from one season to the next. So it has this really nice all year round interest. And even in the wintertime, they still look beautiful. Snow on the ground, they're still going to look great. One plant that I've grown extensively in my garden would be thyme or Thymus. My personal favorite would be Thymus Serpulum, I think is the pronunciation. This is one of the red flowering varieties. It has a nice sort of fluffy, thick, dense, matted growth, spreads really lovely. Also, like the Dianthus, easy to spread and divide, and year-round evergreen, very drought tolerant. It's good for really connecting, areas of your garden bed together. You can plant it all in your garden beds and it will create this nice blanketed effect. And it's also very deer resistant. It has a nice little fragrance. And what's really cool is you can actually walk on this, step on it, and it doesn't get harmed. That's huge when you're going out to, pick some rose flowers or maybe prune back your lavender and you got to step on top of the thyme, it's still going to look good. Now this next plant, I have a lot of experience growing tons of different varieties, and this would be the Hardy Sedum. You can find all sorts of different shapes and sizes, some that are very, very thick, dense, low growers, matted, like 1-2 inches, others that will grow like 3 or 4 inches, and these are all part of the Hardy Sedums. Drought tolerant, sun loving plants. Some of them can get a little bit aggressive, so do be aware, but like those Sempervivums, they are going to look good all year round, even in the winter time, and their succulent nature just gives an added contrast. You can buy these cocoa fiber mats that have tons of different succulent sedums growing on them, and so you can bring that multi-sedum interest to small sections of your garden, and it really creates a lovely tapestry. Another succulent ground cover would be Iceplant, Delosperma hybrids, the winter hardy ones. These ones are very beautiful. They have a light green foliage, but you can find some really incredible gem-like flowers. The Ocean Sunset series is one of my latest and favorite ones out there. Wheels of Wonder is a classic series with lots of different color choices, but these are quite winter hardy, zones 5 I believe, but you really need to ensure that they have awesome drainage. If they don't have absolute perfect drainage, it's going to be hard for them to overwinter in some of the colder areas, so definitely be aware of that. Now, for the shadier areas of the home, Hellebores are by far my favorite plants. These aren't going to have such a low growing effect like the Dianthus or the thyme, things like that. They're going to provide a little bit more height, maybe 12 inches in height, but they have such a thick, dense growth that really, wherever you plant them, weeds are not going to grow. You're not going to have to do mulch in those areas. And as they grow, they're also perfect for dividing and making more of, which I've done many times at my garden here in Pennsylvania. And what I love about them also is their thick, like leathery foliage. It stays looking good 12 months out of the year. Wintertime, they look beautiful, especially when you have some snow on them. They're absolutely divine. And they have flowers early in the spring, so it's one of those first flowers, like around the time of, honestly, our daffodils is when our hellebores start to bloom. So that's why I plant them by my front door. So even in the wintertime, leave out the front door, I can see them blooming. Absolutely an awesome choice for the shadier areas. Now in the garden that I just created for my client here, I used quite a bit of Festuca, the blue Festuca, because she was worried that all of my ground covers, these low maintenance plants wouldn't offer color. And in many times they are a simple green, but the blue Festuca, obviously it's blue, and it's like this just really beautiful kind of icy blue color, and it has this grassy foliage which really contrasts well when you plant it with other shrubs, other herbaceous perennials. A contrast of color and texture, and it will look good all year round as well. Now, one plant that I have fallen in love with more recently would be Vinca minor. I used to think this would be a little bit too aggressive, and it can be a little aggressive when given really optimal conditions, but it has a really relaxed nature about it. It's perfect for a part sun, part shade garden, has very low growth, so it really is unobtrusive. If you have some established shrubs, it's going to just kind of fill in all of those nooks and crannies. It's evergreen, a rich color of dark green foliage, and it has some lovely periwinkle blue, purple blooms. Now, if you have areas that are slopes with bad soil, lots of erosion, consider Hypericum calycinum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that the species correctly, but this is something that I've used at the very front of my driveway, and I also used it in this client's garden just recently on slopes. Lots of erosion, lots of really hot, intense sun, terrible soil, this is an awesome plant for those areas. It's an awesome problem-solving plant because it will cover a gorgeous blanket. It's mostly evergreen. There's a few different kinds out there. You can get ones with a rich green or more of a yellowy green foliage, and both of them will have nice St. John's wort's yellow blooms. A really lovely woodland style ground cover would be Hardy Plumbago. This is Ceratostigma plumbaginoides. And this is a really low-key ground cover. It's very, I find it mixes really well with woodland plants like ferns or coral bells, which is another one on this list. And it's great because it's evergreen, but it will change foliage colors in the autumn. The foliage will turn a mahogany, so it has that added interest. That's when it kind of really starts to look nice. And it also is going to have sort of those periwinkle blue blooms as well. Now the next plant, Creeping Jenny, you want to stay away from the green variety. That's very invasive in many areas. And I have to put a little asterisk around the yellow variety. The yellow variety, the Lysimachia nummularia variety, aurea, is the yellow variety. And this is not nearly as aggressive as the green one, but if you give it a sunny conditions with a lot of moisture, it will become too aggressive. So don't plant it in those areas. But they do well in areas that are very dry with really intense drainage, areas that don't get much irrigation in whether it's the sun or the shade. So it is a very versatile plant, and the fact that it has a yellow foliage can really brighten up some of those darker areas. So it's something to consider if you need, to fill some areas that are hard to get plants established. This one typically will establish in even the worst of soils. Now another shade-loving ground cover would be Lamium. This I have planted around my Ito peonies. It's an evergreen foliage that has like some silvery tones about it, which is really unique. You can find varieties in both pink and purple. It spreads really well. Never too aggressive, but it definitely can as it grows, it can get a little bit strung out, so it does benefit from shearing back occasionally, especially after its first flush of flowers in the springtime. Giving it a nice shear back will allow it to regrow. And when I'm planting ground covers, I don't typically like that because I want ground covers to be looking good all year round without any sort of shearing back needed. So definitely that is one caveat, but it has a really unique foliage. So it's something to consider, especially because it grows in the shade. Now, many of us would be familiar with hardy geraniums, things like Roseanne geraniums. I have found that a lot of them, like Roseanne, they are a little bit fluffy, and like that Lamium, they do get strung out, particularly during the hottest days of the summer. So I tend to stay away from a lot of hardy geraniums, but I have found some, particularly the cranesbill style geraniums, that have a much thicker, denser growth, that don't get fluffy but really stay compact, like 4 inches, 5 inches tall or more or less. Those can be awesome ground covers. One that I've really fallen in love with is called the Intense Geranium. It doesn't flower as freely as something like Roseanne, but it has a much more well-kempt growth habit. And for me, that's what I want when I'm growing ground covers. So that's an awesome option. Do some research because there's literally hundreds, maybe thousands of different kinds of hardy geraniums out there. Now, one that I have not used personally because it's kind of outside of my desire, but I have friends that use it, would be strawberries. Strawberries plants are evergreen. Strawberry plants tend to be evergreen, and they are perennials, but they're not going to be as dense growers. But if you want to create like an edible landscape, this can be a really great option, whether you're trying to feed yourself or just feed the animals. I mean, strawberries is going to have a nice low growing growth habit, so technically is a ground cover. Wouldn't be my first choice, but I thought I'd offer it out there anyway. Now, another shade lover would be the coral bells that I mentioned earlier. This is a really similar growing habitat to the Hellebores, shadier, preferring a little bit more moist, rich soils. That's going to keep them looking the absolute best. And I love coral bells. I think that every shade garden should have some coral bells because there's so many different colors. You have, purples and silvers and light greens, dark greens, multicolors, and they do tend to be I would call them semi-evergreen. Sometimes they stay evergreen in my garden, sometimes not, but they have nice little clumps, really well kept. They're not gonna get they're not gonna overgrow, they're not gonna get aggressive. And if you plant a bunch of them together, they can create a nice ground covering effect. Now, another edible would be golden oregano, Oreganum vulgare aureum, I think. This is a sun-loving, drought-tolerant golden oregano that is awesome on slopes as well, rocky areas. I have this planted on the front of my garden bed, a couple of the fronts of my garden beds, and it just has a really thick, maybe like 1 or 2 inches tall, and just kind of spreads really nicely, perfect for that front of the garden bed. As long as you have good sun, good drainage. And I can't remember if I mentioned, but definitely drought tolerant, and of course edible. Cut some, put it on your pizza, it's gonna be good. Now, one plant that I just planted a bunch out in my forest garden, if you caught that video, really exciting video, check that link out for some forest restoration tips. But this would be Archistophilus uva-ursi. I can't remember what they call the common name is, but this is a native to my area, Pennsylvania, and this is awesome. You can just imagine it growing, creeping and crawling over rocks and boulders in the woodland areas. It's evergreen. It just looks like it should be in the forest, and that's exactly, if you have that sort of conditions, plant this and it's gonna look good year round. It spreads phenomenally. Awesome choice for a native plant. Now, another native would be the genus Carex. There's tons of different species of Carex. There's a saying in the world of horticulture that there's a Carex for every growing condition, whether it's dry and sunny, wet and sunny, dry and shady, wet and shady. There's one for every situation. And like those Festucas earlier, they have a really kind of grassy appearance, so it's a lovely texture. Offers a wonderful contrast. Most of them will be evergreen. They're going to benefit from just cutting back in the early spring, allowing them to generate new fresh foliage, and they do so really quickly, right around the end of winter, early spring. And I just love mixing these into my herbaceous perennial beds because they have that really light, airy texture. Has a little bit of movement, really fun, great low maintenance plant. The next one would be ajuga. A couple of my favorites would be chocolate chip, blueberry muffin. I know, makes you want to have something to eat. But this is also, it's kind of like that Vinca minor. It's a very low grower, very low key, very unobtrusive, kind of sits back. You're not really noticing that much, but you'll just notice how it really spreads lovingly, fills out your garden beds with the nice, rich, dark green foliage, many of which have some lovely flowers. This is gonna want a little bit more moisture than some of the other ground covers, but if you can give it like a half day of sun, half day of shade, and some decent moisture, it's gonna be really happy and it's gonna fill out your garden beds supremely. And then a bonus, the 21st on the list, would be Alchemilla mollis. This is the lady's mantle. This is a plant, it has a sort of like similar look to the coral bell, honestly, but it's even a more rapid grower than the coral bells. This can grow in the sun or part shady conditions. I love putting this at the front of the garden beds as well. It's really a nice little entry plant into a garden bed, and it has just this lovely lobed foliage. It just looks good pretty much all the time, has awesome flowers, and it's just a really nice looking plant, a very well-mannered plant. So with this list, now you have a great head start onto adding some new ground cover, low-growing perennials to your garden, many of which are evergreen, some in the sun, some in the shade, and you know, these plants will really transform your garden into a really well-finished feeling garden that requires lower maintenance than it did before. If you are looking for some one-on-one help with your garden, consider joining our membership on the YouTube channel. As a member, you'll get access to our private chat room where you can ask me direct questions and I will respond with text, audios, or video messages to help you figure out what's wrong with your plants or solutions to whatever problems you may be having. But if you did enjoy this video, give it a like, consider subscribing to our channel. We have hundreds and hundreds of videos, and we're producing new videos every single week. Anyways, thanks for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll catch you later. Ciao. If you have some blank areas in your garden space that you're looking to fill with unique plants, check out my website, plant-vibrations.com. You'll find tons of different perennials and annuals, flowering shrubs, edible plants, indoor plants that my family grows, and we will ship them out across the country and they'll arrive at your doorstep. And every single plant that you purchase from my website will allow me to continue to create content that's going to help our plant community grow and flourish.